Have you ever felt like something deep inside you suddenly woke up? Like a part of you that was asleep for years just opened its eyes? That's what a spiritual awakening feels like. It's not just a small change. It's like your whole world flips upside down, but in the best way possible. One day you're going about your normal life, and the next, everything looks different. Colors seem brighter. The world feels more alive. And you feel more awake than you've ever been. This isn't just some passing mood or a fleeting feeling. A spiritual awakening is like finding a hidden door inside yourself that leads to a whole new way of seeing the world. It's as if you've been watching a black and white TV your whole life, and suddenly someone turned on the color. Everything is the same, but completely different at the same time. But here's the thing. A spiritual awakening isn't always all sunshine and rainbows. It can be confusing, even scary at times. Imagine waking up one day and realizing that a lot of what you thought was important doesn't really matter that much. Or that some of your beliefs about yourself and the world might not be true. It's like the ground under your feet starts to shift. That can feel pretty unsettling. Now, you might be wondering, why should I care about all this spiritual stuff? Well, let me tell you. Ignoring a spiritual awakening is like ignoring a tap on the shoulder from the universe. At first, it might seem easier to just keep going about your day-to-day life, pretending nothing's changed. But if you do that, you might miss out on the most amazing journey of your life. Think about it this way. If you ignore a spiritual awakening, you're basically telling the deepest part of yourself to go back to sleep. You're choosing to stay in that black and white world when color is waiting for you. You might keep feeling like something's missing, like there's more to life, but you just can't put your finger on it. You could end up going through the motions, doing what you think you're supposed to do, but never really feeling fulfilled. But if you embrace your spiritual awakening, that's when the magic happens. It's like finally putting on a pair of glasses after squinting at the world your whole life. Suddenly, everything comes into focus. You start to understand yourself in a way you never did before. You might discover strengths you never knew you had, or find a sense of peace you've been searching for your whole life. When you embrace a spiritual awakening, you're saying yes to growth, yes to understanding, yes to a deeper, richer experience of life. It's like upgrading from a kiddie pool to the whole ocean. Sure, the ocean can be scary sometimes. It's big and deep and full of things you don't understand. But it's also beautiful and full of wonders you'd never see if you stayed in the shallow end. And here's the really cool part. When you go through a spiritual awakening, it doesn't just change you. It changes how you interact with the whole world. You might find yourself being kinder, more patient. You might start to see the connections between all things. Problems that used to seem huge might start to look smaller, and opportunities you never noticed before might suddenly appear. I remember the day my own spiritual awakening began. It wasn't dramatic, no lightning bolts or voices from the sky. It started with a feeling, a sort of itch in my mind that I couldn't scratch. I was sitting in traffic, same as I did every day, when suddenly I had this thought, is this all there is? It wasn't a sad thought or an angry one. It was just curious. Like I'd suddenly noticed a door in my house that I'd walked past 1,000 times without seeing. And once I noticed it, I couldn't stop wondering what was on the other side. That question, is this all there is? It was like a pebble dropped in a pond. The ripples just kept spreading. I started noticing things I'd never paid attention to before. The way the sunlight looked filtering through leaves. The expressions on strangers' faces as they walked past. The feeling of my own breath in and out. At first, it was overwhelming. I felt like a kid who'd wandered into the adults' conversation. Everything seemed important, but I didn't understand any of it. I'd find myself zoning out at work, lost in thoughts about the nature of reality. I'd lie awake at night, my mind buzzing with questions I'd never even thought to ask before. There were times I thought I was losing it. I mean, who stays up until 3 a.m. wondering about the meaning of life when they have a 9 a.m. meeting the next day? But I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd stumbled onto something important, something real. I started reading everything I could get my hands on. Books on philosophy, spirituality, psychology. I tried meditation, even though at first I felt silly just sitting there trying to clear my mind. Spoiler alert, your mind doesn't clear just because you tell it to, but that's a story for another day. Slowly, things started to shift. It wasn't always easy. There were days when I felt lost, confused, like I'd stepped off the path and couldn't find my way back. But there were also moments of pure joy, times when I felt more alive than I ever had before. I remember one morning, about 6 months after that day in traffic. I was out for a walk, not really thinking about anything in particular. Suddenly I felt this wave of something, not emotion exactly, more like recognition, like I finally understood what it meant to be alive, to be a part of this big, beautiful, messy world. I stood there on the sidewalk, probably looking like a weirdo to anyone driving past, with tears running down my face, and the biggest smile I'd ever smiled. In that moment, I knew that whatever this journey was, whatever I'd stumbled into that day in traffic, it was the most important thing I'd ever done. Now, I'm not saying my experience is the only way a spiritual awakening can happen. Everyone's journey is different. Maybe for you, it'll start with a dream that feels more real than reality. Or maybe you'll be washing dishes one day and suddenly understand the meaning of life. If that happens, please let me know. I'm still figuring that one out. The point is, a spiritual awakening isn't something that happens to special people in far-off mountaintop temples. It can happen to anyone, anywhere. It happened to me, a regular person with a regular job, sitting in regular traffic, and it changed everything. Now I know what you might be thinking. Spiritual awakening sounds like something out of a New Age bookstore, right? Like you need to start wearing crystals and talking to trees. But it's not like that at all. Well, unless you want to talk to trees, then go for it. Trees are great listeners. In simple terms, a spiritual awakening is when you start to see beyond the surface of things. It's like you've been living in a house your whole life, and suddenly you realize there's a whole other floor you never knew about. Everything you knew is still there, but now there's so much more to explore. Think of it this way. You know how when you were a kid you believed in Santa Claus? And then one day you figured out the truth. That's kind of like a spiritual awakening, but instead of learning the truth about Santa, you start to learn the truth about, well, everything. It's like you've been watching a play your whole life, totally caught up in the story. A spiritual awakening is when you suddenly realize you're not just watching the play, you're in it. And not only that, but you're also the writer, the director, and maybe even the stage itself. Now, this doesn't mean you suddenly have all the answers. Far from it. If anything, you end up with more questions than you started with. But they're better questions, deeper questions. Instead of wondering what's on TV tonight, you start wondering about the nature of reality itself. A spiritual awakening feels different for everyone, but there are some common experiences. You might feel more connected to the world around you. Colors might seem brighter. Music might sound richer. You might find yourself feeling compassion for people you used to ignore. For me, it felt like waking up from a dream. You know that fuzzy feeling you have when you first open your eyes in the morning? When the world doesn't quite make sense yet? It was like that, but instead of lasting for a few seconds, it lasted for weeks. Everything I thought I knew suddenly seemed strange and new. I remember walking down the street and suddenly being amazed by, well, everything. The way people moved, the sound of traffic, the feeling of the air on my skin. It was like I was experiencing the world for the first time, and in a way, I was. But here's the thing about spiritual awakenings. They're not always easy. Sometimes they're downright uncomfortable. Imagine if everything you believed about yourself and the world was written on a chalkboard. A spiritual awakening is like someone coming along and erasing that chalkboard. Suddenly, you have to figure out what to write there instead. This can be scary. It can make you question everything. You might look at your job, your relationships, your whole life, and wonder if you've been doing it all wrong. You might feel lost, confused, even a little crazy sometimes. But here's the secret. That discomfort is a good thing. It means you're growing. It means you're pushing past the boundaries of what you thought you knew. It's like working out. It might hurt while you're doing it, but afterwards you're stronger. A spiritual awakening isn't about becoming a different person. It's about becoming more you. The real you, underneath all the stuff you've picked up over the years. All the beliefs you've absorbed from others, all the limitations you've put on yourself. A spiritual awakening strips all that away and leaves you with, well, you. The real you. And let me tell you, meeting the real you is the most exciting, terrifying, wonderful experience you can have. It's like falling in love, but instead of falling in love with someone else, you're falling in love with life itself, with existence, with the sheer amazing fact of being alive. So if you feel like something's shifting inside you, if the world suddenly seems different in ways you can't quite explain, don't worry. You're not going crazy. You're waking up. And trust me, the view from here is pretty amazing. You know that feeling when you're having a dream and suddenly you realize you're dreaming? That moment of, oh, wait a minute. That's kind of what the start of a spiritual awakening feels like. But instead of waking up from a dream, you're waking up to a whole new way of seeing reality. Now, spiritual awakenings don't come with neon signs pointing the way. They're usually more subtle than that. But there are some common signs that you might be going through one. Let's talk about a few of them. First up, you might start feeling like something's off. Like there's a puzzle piece that doesn't quite fit anymore. The life you've been living, the things you've been doing, they might start to feel strange, like you're wearing clothes that don't fit quite right. This isn't about being unhappy necessarily. It's more like a nagging feeling that there's something more out there, something you're missing. I remember when this hit me. I was sitting at my desk one day, doing the same work I'd done 1,000 times before. Suddenly, I had this weird thought. Is this really what I'm here for? It wasn't that I hated my job. It just felt like there had to be more to life than this. Like I was meant for something bigger. Not in an egotistical way, but in a there's got to be more to existence than spreadsheets kind of way. Another sign is that you might start seeing connections everywhere. It's like the universe turns into one big game of connect the dots. You might notice patterns you never saw before. Coincidences start to feel less like coincidences and more like, well, I don't know what. Messages, maybe? Signs? Whatever you call them, it starts to feel like the world is trying to tell you something. For me, this showed up in the form of numbers. I started seeing the same number sequence everywhere, on clocks, license plates, receipts. At first, I thought I was just noticing it because it was my birth year. But it kept happening, over and over in the weirdest places. It felt like more than just chance, like the universe was tapping me on the shoulder, trying to get my attention. Here's another big one. You might start feeling more sensitive. And I don't just mean emotionally, although that can happen too. I'm talking about all your senses. Colors might seem brighter. Music might sound richer. Food might taste better. It's like someone turned up the volume on your entire sensory experience. I noticed this one day when I was out for a walk. Suddenly, the green of the leaves seemed almost impossibly vibrant. I could hear birds singing that I'd never noticed before. Even the air felt different on my skin. It was like I'd been looking at the world through a dirty window my whole life, and someone had finally cleaned it. Now, here's a sign that can be a bit confusing. You might start feeling disconnected from things that used to be important to you. Old hobbies might not interest you anymore. You might find yourself pulling away from certain friends or family members. This doesn't mean you stop caring about them. It's more like you're tuning into a different frequency, and some of the old stations aren't coming through as clearly. I went through a phase where I couldn't stand watching TV. Shows I used to love just felt empty, meaningless. Instead, I found myself wanting to spend time in nature or reading books about philosophy and spirituality. It was like my soul was hungry for something, and the old stuff just wasn't cutting it anymore. Here's another sign. You might start having some really vivid dreams. Or maybe you start remembering your dreams more often. Some people even report having dreams that feel prophetic, like they're getting messages while they sleep. My dreams got so intense during my awakening that I started keeping a dream journal. I'd wake up feeling like I'd been on some epic adventure, or like I'd just had a conversation with a wise teacher. Sometimes the dreams didn't make any sense, but they always felt important somehow. Lastly, you might find yourself asking the big questions. You know, the ones we usually avoid because they make our brains hurt. What's the meaning of life? Why am I here? What happens when we die? These aren't just idle wonderings. They start to feel really, really important. I remember lying awake at night, my mind spinning with questions I'd never really thought about before. Why is there something rather than nothing? What is consciousness? Is there a God? Heavy stuff, right? But suddenly, these questions felt like the most important things in the world. Now here's the thing about these signs. You might experience all of them, or just a few. They might hit you all at once, or trickle in slowly over time. There's no one-size-fits-all spiritual awakening. Your journey is going to be as unique as you are. And remember, having these experiences doesn't necessarily mean you're going through a spiritual awakening. Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, you know? But if you're nodding along as you read this, thinking, yes, that's exactly how I've been feeling, well, you might just be waking up. So you think you might be going through a spiritual awakening. Or maybe you're just curious about what it might be like. Either way, you're probably wondering, okay, but what does this actually do to a person? Well, buckle up, because we're about to dive into some of the ways a spiritual awakening can turn your world upside down in the best possible way. First things first, a spiritual awakening can totally change how you see yourself. It's like you've been looking at your reflection in a funhouse mirror your whole life, and suddenly, you're seeing yourself clearly for the first time. All those labels you've been carrying around, I'm not good enough, I'm just an average person, I'm bad at this or that, they start to fall away. You begin to realize that you're so much more than you thought you were. I remember the moment this really hit me. I was sitting in meditation, something I'd started doing during my awakening, when I had this overwhelming sense of bigness. Not physical bigness, but like my consciousness was expanding beyond my body. In that moment, I realized that all the limits I'd put on myself were just that. Limits I'd put there. They weren't real. It was like I'd been living in a tiny box my whole life, and someone just showed me how to open the door. Another big change? Your priorities might do a complete 180. Things that used to seem super important, like having the latest gadget or impressing your neighbors, might suddenly seem kind of silly. Instead, you might find yourself caring more about stuff like kindness, authenticity, and personal growth. For me, this showed up in my career. I used to be all about climbing the corporate ladder, getting that next big promotion. But after my awakening started, I found myself caring less about titles and more about whether my work was actually helping people. I started volunteering more. I became more interested in my co-workers as people, not just as, well, co-workers. It was like my definition of success had completely changed. Here's another big one. Your relationships might go through some major shifts. As you change, you might find that some relationships no longer fit who you're becoming. This can be tough. You might drift apart from old friends, or even feel like you're speaking a different language than your family. But it's not all about losing connections. You might also find yourself forming deep, meaningful relationships with new people. Or maybe your existing relationships transform into something richer and more authentic. It's like the universe starts sending people your way who are on the same wavelength. I had a friend I'd known since high school. We'd always been close, but after my awakening started, our connection went to a whole new level. It was like we could understand each other without even speaking. On the flip side, I also had some friendships fade away. It wasn't anyone's fault. We had just grown in different directions. Now let's talk about how you experience the world. A spiritual awakening can make you feel more connected to, well, everything. That feeling of separation, of being a separate me against the world, it starts to dissolve. You might have moments where you feel at one with nature or even with the entire universe. I had an experience like this while hiking one day. I was standing on top of a hill, looking out at the view, when suddenly the boundary between me and everything else just disappeared. For a moment, I wasn't separate from the trees, the sky, the earth. I was all of it, and it was all me. It sounds wild, I know, but in that moment, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Another change you might notice is a shift in how you handle difficult situations. Things that used to stress you out might not bother you as much. You might find yourself staying calm in situations that would have sent you into a tailspin before. It's not that bad things stop happening. It's that you start to see them differently. I noticed this one day when I got a flat tire on the way to an important meeting. Pre-awakening me would have been a mess. Stressed, angry, probably yelling at the tire as if it had done this on purpose. But instead, I found myself feeling weirdly calm. I remember thinking, well, this is happening now. Getting upset won't change that. I called for help, let my colleagues know I'd be late, and actually ended up having a nice chat with the tow truck driver. The old me would never have believed it. Here's a big one. You might develop a whole new relationship with the concept of time. That constant rush, the feeling of never having enough time, it might start to fade. You may find yourself more able to live in the present moment instead of always worrying about the future or dwelling on the past. For me, this was one of the most noticeable changes. I used to be the kind of person who was always rushing, always checking the time. But as my awakening progressed, I found myself naturally slowing down. I started to enjoy simple moments more. The taste of my morning coffee, the feel of the sun on my face. Don't get me wrong, I still use a calendar and show up to things on time. But the constant anxiety about time just faded away. Lastly, you might find yourself developing a deep sense of trust in the universe. This doesn't mean you think everything will always be perfect, but you start to trust that whatever happens, you can handle it. You develop a kind of inner knowing that everything is unfolding as it should. I remember the moment I realized this had happened to me. I was facing a big decision, the kind that used to keep me up at night weighing pros and cons. But this time, I felt this deep sense of peace. I knew that whatever I chose, it would be okay. Not because everything would be perfect, but because I trusted myself and the universe to handle whatever came my way. Now, I want to be clear. These changes don't usually happen overnight. A spiritual awakening is a process, not an event. These shifts can take time, and they might come with some uncomfortable moments as you adjust to your new way of being. But in my experience, and in the experience of many others I've talked to, the journey is more than worth it. All right, let's get real for a minute. We've talked about all the amazing ways a spiritual awakening can change your life. And don't get me wrong, it is amazing. But it's not all sunshine and rainbows. A spiritual awakening can also be confusing, scary, and downright uncomfortable at times. It's like renovating your house. The end result is great, but the process can be pretty messy. One of the biggest challenges people face during a spiritual awakening is the feeling of being lost. Imagine you've been following a map your whole life. You know where you're going and how to get there. Then suddenly, someone takes away the map and says, "Figure it out." That's kind of what a spiritual awakening can feel like. All the guidelines you've been following, all the goals you've been working towards, they might suddenly seem meaningless. And that can be really disorienting. I remember going through a phase where I questioned everything. And I mean everything. My career path, my relationships, even what I liked to eat. It was like all my preferences and beliefs had been shuffled like a deck of cards, and I had to sort them out all over again. There were days when I felt completely adrift, like I didn't know who I was anymore. Another common challenge is feeling like you don't fit in anymore. As you start to change, you might feel out of step with the people around you. It can be lonely, especially if your friends and family don't understand what you're going through. You might find yourself using words like energy or consciousness and getting blank stares in return. I went through a period where I felt like I was speaking a different language than everyone else. I'd try to talk about my experiences, about this new way I was seeing the world, and people would look at me like I'd grown a second head. It was frustrating and isolating. I felt like an alien in my own life. Here's another tough one: the dark night of the soul. This is a term used to describe a period of deep spiritual depression that can come with awakening. It's like all your old beliefs and ways of finding meaning have been stripped away, but you haven't quite figured out what to replace them with yet. It can feel like you're lost in a dark forest with no way out. My dark night hit me like a ton of bricks. I remember lying on my couch one day, feeling like there was no point to anything. I couldn't find joy in the things I used to love. I felt disconnected from everyone and everything. It was like I could see through the illusion of the world, but I couldn't figure out what was real anymore. It was a scary time. I'm not going to lie. Another challenge that can come up is physical symptoms. Yep, you read that right. A spiritual awakening can actually make you feel physically ill sometimes. People report everything from headaches and fatigue to digestive issues and unexplained aches and pains. It's like your body is adjusting to your new vibration, and it can be uncomfortable. I went through a period where I was exhausted all the time. No matter how much I slept, I felt like I could sleep for days more. I also had these weird energy rushes, like electricity running through my body. It was unnerving, especially because I couldn't explain it to my doctor. Sorry, doc, I think it's just my spiritual awakening isn't exactly a medical diagnosis. Here's a tricky one: spiritual ego. This is what happens when you start to feel special or chosen because of your awakening. You might start to look down on people who haven't had the same experiences as you. It's an easy trap to fall into, and it can really get in the way of your growth. I caught myself doing this at one point. I remember thinking, why can't everyone see what I see? Why are they all so blind? It took me a while to realize that this kind of thinking was just my ego trying to reassert itself in a new spiritual form. It was humbling to recognize that I wasn't any better or more advanced than anyone else, just on a different part of the path. Another challenge is the intensity of emotions. As you become more aware and open, you might find yourself feeling things more deeply. This can be beautiful when it comes to positive emotions, but it can be overwhelming when it comes to sadness, anger, or fear. There was a period where I felt like I was on an emotional roller coaster. One minute I'd be filled with incredible joy and love for everything around me. The next, I'd be sobbing over a news story or feeling intense anger about injustice in the world. It was exhausting, and sometimes I wished I could go back to feeling things less intensely. Lastly, there's the challenge of integration. This is the process of bringing your spiritual experiences into your everyday life. It's one thing to have a profound realization while meditating. It's another to remember that realization when you're stuck in traffic or arguing with your spouse. I struggled with this a lot. I'd have these amazing insights during my quiet times, but then I'd get stressed about work and forget it all. It felt like I was living two separate lives sometimes, my spiritual life and my regular life. Learning to bridge that gap, to bring my awakening into every aspect of my life, was and still is an ongoing process. Now, I know all of this might sound a bit daunting. You might be thinking, geez, if this is what a spiritual awakening is like, maybe I don't want one after all. But here's the thing. These challenges, as tough as they can be, are part of the growth process. They're like the growing pains you went through as a kid. They're not fun while you're going through them, but they're leading you towards something amazing. And you don't have to face these challenges alone. There are people out there who understand what you're going through. There are books, podcasts, support groups, all kinds of resources to help you navigate this journey. Remember, millions of people throughout history have gone through spiritual awakenings. You're not alone in this. The key is to be gentle with yourself, to understand that it's okay to struggle sometimes, to know that the challenges are temporary, but the growth and understanding you gain will last a lifetime. It's like climbing a mountain. The climb might be tough, but the view from the top is worth every step. Now that we've talked about the challenges, let's dive into some practices that can help you navigate your spiritual awakening. Think of these as tools in your spiritual toolbox. They're simple but powerful. And the best part? You don't need any special equipment or skills to get started. First up, let's talk about meditation. I know, you've probably heard this one before, but there's a reason meditation is recommended so often. It's like a gym workout for your soul. Just like lifting weights builds your muscles, meditation builds your spiritual awareness. When I first started meditating, I thought I was doing it wrong. My mind wouldn't stop chattering, and I couldn't sit still for more than a few minutes. But here's the secret. That's totally normal. Meditation isn't about emptying your mind. It's about observing your thoughts without getting caught up in them. It's like watching clouds pass across the sky. You see them, but you don't try to hold on to them or push them away. Start small. Even 5 minutes a day can make a big difference. Find a quiet spot, sit comfortably, and focus on your breath. When thoughts come up, and they will, just notice them and gently bring your attention back to your breath. Over time, you might find that the space between your thoughts gets a little bigger. And in that space, you might just find some amazing insights. Next up, let's talk about journaling. This isn't about writing the next great novel. It's about giving your thoughts and feelings a place to land. Sometimes, the simple act of putting pen to paper can help you make sense of what you're experiencing. During my awakening, I filled notebook after notebook. Some days I wrote about my experiences. Other days I just scribbled down questions or random thoughts. There were even days when I just doodled or wrote the same word over and over. It all helped. It was like I was leaving a trail of breadcrumbs for myself, marking the path of my journey. You don't need to write every day, and you don't need to write a lot. Just make it a habit to check in with yourself on paper. You might be surprised at what comes out when you give yourself permission to write without judgment. Here's another practice that can be really powerful: spending time in nature. There's something about being surrounded by trees, or listening to the sound of water, or feeling the earth beneath your feet that can help you feel more connected to the world around you. I remember one day when I was feeling particularly overwhelmed by my awakening. I decided to go for a walk in a nearby park. As I walked, I started to pay attention to the trees. I noticed how they swayed in the wind, how their roots dug deep into the earth. Suddenly, I had this sense of being part of something much bigger than myself. It was like the trees were teaching me how to be both grounded and flexible at the same time. You don't need to live in the wilderness to benefit from nature. Even sitting in your backyard or tending to a houseplant can help. The key is to really pay attention. Use all your senses. What do you see? What do you hear? What do you feel? Let nature be your teacher. Now let's talk about the practice of gratitude. This one's simple, but don't underestimate its power. Each day, take a moment to think of 3 things you're grateful for. They don't have to be big things. Maybe you're grateful for your morning coffee, or for the way the sunlight looks coming through your window, or for the fact that you have a roof over your head. When I started doing this, it felt a bit forced at first. But over time, I noticed that I started looking for things to be grateful for throughout my day. It was like I had tuned my radio to the gratitude station, and suddenly I was picking up signals everywhere. This practice can help shift your focus from what's wrong in your life to what's right. And that shift can be transformative. Here's a practice that might sound a bit woo-woo, but stick with me. Energy work. This can take many forms, from yoga to Tai Chi to Reiki. The basic idea is that there's an energy that flows through all things, including us, and learning to work with this energy can help balance and heal us. I was skeptical about this at first, but then I tried a yoga class, and I was amazed at how different I felt afterwards. It wasn't just the physical exercise. There was something about the combination of movement and breath that left me feeling more centered and balanced. Since then, I've explored other forms of energy work, and while I can't explain exactly how it works, I can tell you that it helps. If you're not ready to dive into a full-on energy practice, start with some simple breathing exercises. Just taking a few deep, conscious breaths can help shift your energy and bring you back to the present moment. Lastly, let's talk about the practice of mindfulness. This one ties into all the others we've talked about. Mindfulness is simply the practice of being present in the moment. It's about paying attention to what's happening right now, rather than getting caught up in thoughts about the past or future. You can practice mindfulness anytime, anywhere. While you're eating, really taste your food. While you're walking, really feel your feet touching the ground. While you're talking to someone, really listen to what they're saying. It's about fully experiencing your life as it's happening, rather than sleepwalking through it. I remember one day when I was washing dishes, a chore I usually rushed through while thinking about other things. But this time, I decided to be mindful about it. I noticed the warmth of the water, the slipperiness of the soap, the satisfaction of seeing a dirty dish become clean. It turned a mundane task into almost a meditation, and I realized that every moment of our lives can be like that, if we choose to pay attention. Now, here's the thing about all these practices. They're not about reaching some final destination. They're about the journey. You don't have to do them perfectly. You don't have to do all of them every day. The key is to find what works for you and to make it a regular part of your life. Think of these practices as ways to tune into the frequency of your awakening. They can help you stay connected to that deeper part of yourself, even as you go about your daily life. They can help you navigate the challenges we talked about earlier, and they can help you integrate your spiritual experiences into your everyday world. Remember, a spiritual awakening isn't about escaping your life. It's about fully embracing it in all its messy, beautiful complexity. These practices can help you do just that. As we wrap up our exploration of spiritual awakening, there's one thing I want you to remember. This journey never really ends. A spiritual awakening isn't a destination you reach and then stop. It's more like a door opening to a whole new way of experiencing life, and once that door is open, there's always more to discover. Think of it like climbing a mountain. You might think the goal is to reach the top, but when you get there, you realize that there are more peaks in the distance, more beautiful vistas to explore. Each step of the journey reveals new wonders, new challenges, new opportunities for growth. I remember thinking at one point that I had it all figured out. I'd had some profound experiences, I'd worked through some tough challenges, and I thought, well, that's it. I'm awakened now. But life has a way of humbling you. Just when I thought I had all the answers, new questions would arise. Just when I thought I'd conquered my fears, new ones would pop up. And you know what? That's okay. In fact, it's more than okay. It's beautiful. Because it means that life never stops offering us chances to learn, to grow, to expand our understanding of ourselves and the world around us. So as you continue on your journey, be gentle with yourself. Remember that there's no right way to have a spiritual awakening. Your path is unique to you. What works for someone else might not work for you, and that's perfectly fine. Trust your own inner guidance. Stay curious. Keep asking questions. When you think you've got it all figured out, challenge yourself to look deeper. There's always more to learn, more to experience, more to understand. And don't forget to enjoy the journey. Yes, there will be challenges. Yes, there will be times when you feel lost or confused. But there will also be moments of incredible beauty, of profound peace, of joy so intense it takes your breath away. Savor those moments. Let them fuel you for the rest of your journey. Remember, too, that you're not alone on this path. Throughout history, people have been going through spiritual awakenings. From ancient mystics to modern-day seekers, countless others have walked this road before you. And right now, all around the world, there are others on the same journey. You're part of a beautiful, global community of awakening souls. As you go forward, keep your heart open. Be willing to be surprised. Life has a way of showing up in unexpected ways when you're on a spiritual path. That person you least expect might turn out to be your greatest teacher. That challenge you're dreading might turn out to be your biggest opportunity for growth. Stay open to the possibilities, and above all, trust the process. Trust that even when things seem difficult or confusing, you're exactly where you need to be. Trust that every experience, every insight, every challenge is part of your unique journey of awakening. Your spiritual awakening is a gift. It's an invitation to live life more fully, to love more deeply, to experience the world more richly. It's a chance to peel away the layers of conditioning and discover who you really are at your core. So keep going, keep exploring, keep growing. Your journey of spiritual awakening is just beginning, and the best is yet to come. We've covered a lot of ground in our exploration of spiritual awakening. From the first stirrings of awareness to the challenges of the journey, from practical tips to the ongoing nature of awakening, we've delved into many aspects of this profound experience. Remember, a spiritual awakening is not about becoming someone new. It's about uncovering who you've always been beneath the layers of societal conditioning and personal beliefs. It's about waking up to the truth of your existence and the interconnectedness of all things. This journey may not always be easy, but it is infinitely rewarding. It offers the possibility of living a life of greater awareness, deeper peace, and more authentic connection, both with yourself and with the world around you. As you continue on your path, remember to be patient with yourself. Embrace the questions as much as the answers. Allow yourself to be amazed by the mystery of existence. And above all, trust in your own inner wisdom to guide you. Your spiritual awakening is a precious gift. It's an opportunity to experience life in all its depth and richness. Embrace it with an open heart and a curious mind, and watch as your world transforms in beautiful and unexpected ways. The journey of awakening is just beginning. And the most exciting part? You've already taken the first step. Simply by being open to this exploration, you've set yourself on a path of discovery and growth. So keep going, keep exploring, keep awakening. The universe is waiting to reveal its wonders to you.